Thank you all for coming this morning. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're here. And our topic of discussion this morning will be student-led book clubs. We're going to continue to embody the values of the Creating Passionate Readers series as we transition to focusing on building a community of readers in our classrooms. Up to this point, we've explored the idea that students have choice to discover what they like and dislike in books, that we set aside sacred time to read in school and at home. We're conferring with students daily about their reading and writing, developing relevant and meaningful reading experiences by planning using backward design, untethering from the whole class novel. And so now we're ready to kind of focus on that building of a community. So why book clubs? Why are they a valuable place in our classrooms after we've kind of created that foundation of independent reading? We can continue to honor student choice. We can help students develop SEL skills, and it's so critical that they get practice in communication and relationship building, not just with you, the teacher, but with their peers. And these discussions are going to deepen student understanding of a text. When you hear from other perspectives and other voices, your knowledge of your text and how you interpret it goes deeper. So, what's the difference between literature circles and book clubs? Because when I was growing up, we always did literature circles. I started out as a teacher doing literature circles. How are they different from a book club? In a literature circle, it's often that discussions and inquiry, or the kinds of questions that students discuss, are teacher led, teacher written, teacher designed. There's somewhat of a rigid structure in terms of this many minutes you do this, and this person has this job that they have to prepare and bring. And so there's more of a rigid structure involved. It's not always the case, but at least in my teaching experience, as well as my experience as a student, kids are often assigned texts based on what is deemed to be their appropriate level. Often this level is based in some valid data like MAP scores, but also maybe less valid data like Lexile scores. And it often creates some stigma between students, especially if they are deemed as assigned to be with the low book or the easy book. That often creates a culture of stigma and hierarchy within your classroom. And there's an emphasis on reading strategies and the roles of individuals within the literature circle. Within a book club, discussions and inquiry are student-led, and so students are writing questions. The topic of discussion that students have is completely organized and designed by students. The structure is flexible, meaning, hey, you have this time constraint, but the order of topics, who says what, who does what, and when is completely flexible and can look different from week to week. And with book club, students are still self-selecting texts, and we'll talk about how you as a teacher can provide those options for students. And there's more of an emphasis on shared conversation and deepening understanding of the text. Really, book clubs are just that, conversations about their reading, similar to the reading conference. It's just with more people and it's with their peers. And the reason we want to move towards more of a book club style format is we know that reading individually, it's a skill, but reading with as a community is an art form. It takes so much social emotional intelligence for a student to be able to have a generous give and take conversation amongst their peers about their reading. And so it's certainly not easy. It takes practice. It takes explicit instruction from that teacher and scaffolding and adapting and modeling. But it really is a worthwhile pursuit. So how do we know if your students are ready for this communal reading experience? I always say that students are not ready to read together until they've found and established a strong reader identity. This graphic I came across, it's not based in research, it's just kind of a funny comic, but it kind of embodies the different phases of a reader identity, starting with discovering books, falling in love with them, books becoming part of who you are, books as a substitute for human interaction. I think I've gone through that phase a few times. Books as frustration, going back to no books, rediscovering books, hoarding books, and then passing books on to the next generation. I don't think that all of these steps are applicable to every person in their reading journey, I definitely go through phases 1 through 7, and I cycle through that all the time as a reader. But because I have really strong books as an identity, I'm able to go back to that. So this is the phase that we hope students are at, all students are at, before they come to a table of conversation with their peers about what they're reading. It's just like if you're on like a rowing team. If everyone in the boat has conditioned and trained and is prepared to move that boat forward, the boat's going to move quickly and smoothly. But imagine if just one or two people have not been training. That boat is going to stop, it's going to sink, it's going to struggle. And so every student within the book club needs to have at least some form of books as identity. So what does that tangibly look like? Again, it's going to vary from student to student, and you're going to use your judgment as a teacher to determine this. But I found in my teaching experience that if a student has read from cover to cover and truly enjoyed at least two books of their choice, then perhaps they're ready to try a book club. Now, it's possible that you will have some classes in which the majority of students do not meet this goal, and that's okay. I've had classes where we did independent choice reading all year. We never transitioned to book clubs or whole class novels, which we'll talk about next week. That is okay. There is value in having ongoing independent choice. But I had a lot of classes where the majority of students were ready to have a communal reading experience and have that rich experience in their learning. So if a student has enjoyed at least two books and the majority of your kids are there, I think you might be ready to try some book clubs. But when we're talking about these book clubs, again, our goal is to breed a reading community, and our communities are built through conversation, which enables contagious learning, where enthusiasm and struggle is shared. So that's what a book club should feel and sound like, that give and take, push and pull of enthusiasm and struggle, and making sure students understand that the struggle is just as rich and valuable as the enthusiasm for their reading. So how can students read as a community? How do we make that happen? We make sure we give students time to establish norms and expectations for the book club. Before they have their first meeting, you have students determine how are we going to treat each other, how are we going to prepare, how are we going to interact and speak to one another. What happens if someone is absent from a book club meeting or knows they're going to be absent? They get to set the terms of the culture of their group. Give them time to do that. And I've hyperlinked an example of what may be an activity that you could do with students to get them to this point. Within those norms and expectations, students are the ones who determine the pacing for their reading, how often they read, what chapters or how many pages they need to have from week to week. Typically, you're going to need to provide kind of everyone needs to be finished with their book club book by this point because you have calendar constraints and time to move forward. So you can set that end time, but students will be the ones to determine how often, how much they read per week in preparation for their meetings. And we need to provide explicit instruction on effective conversation and practice that effective conversation in class. Practice, practice, practice. And again, I've hyperlinked here a series of slides with activities and games that teach students how to converse. And the key piece of these activities is that students reflect with each other. What made that conversation and that problem solving effective? What made it ineffective? How can we do better next time? And that time in class will really help prepare students to interact and speak. And again, you're really hitting those castle competencies of social and emotional learning when we're practicing and giving this explicit instruction. So how do you choose what options you have for book clubs? You might consider how the books can align with a curricular unit of study in terms of the pacing for the year. Definitely always consider providing mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors for all students so that whatever book students choose, someone has something that represents them and makes them feel seen. And you could also consider a genre or a thematic study. I've seen really well done genre studies of nonfiction narratives and how everyone has a different narrative piece to choose. You could do a thematic study. Everyone has a book where a theme of injustice or a theme of perseverance it takes place in the book. So that could be something you choose. You also might want to consider, are you going to use books from the core novel approved list from the school board? And I've hyperlinked that list there because then again, you could choose any of those books without any problem. And you wouldn't have any problem accessing or purchasing new copies if needed. But you could also consider exceptions to that. If you choose titles from outside the core list, I've hyperlinked for you Guideline 5A and Policy 4600. It simply says you can have students read books outside of the core novel list for a book club if you're providing 10 or more titles for them to choose from. So you can choose whatever 10 titles you want, kids can choose from those books, and you're good to go. If you're pursuing that option, you might ask, how am I going to get the books? And there's a couple of ways. The Blue Valley Educational Foundation, you could apply for a grant. Here, there's the link to the Blue Valley Foundation website, but I also have provided for you guys, and it will be in our shared folder, an example grant of how to request books. It includes some research that I think will really add some weight to your grant application. You can also use an Amazon Prime list. I had some colleagues who just posted on their social media, say, hey, parents, family, friends, community, I have this list of, here's some books that my kids need. Would you just buy one? You know, it's $5.99 for a book. Would you just, hey, donate one and have it sent to us? And it's amazing. I saw their list was cleared out within 24 hours. It was amazing. So now their kids have all of these different copies of books for book clubs. And the last option, I would love to explore this with someone. So if this is an avenue that you pursue, let me know. But Project Lit Community is a mission created by Jared Amato where his goal is to end book deserts in our communities. And I often hear from Blue Valley teachers that, well, Johnson County is not exactly a book desert, and that's true. But I think that we could still pursue that avenue because a book desert is still a book desert, even if parents can afford to purchase books, but they're not buying them because kids aren't reading them, right? So I think that there's a lot of value in this avenue, and it's a great way to get access to really good books, especially those with mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. When we're organizing book clubs, remember that your daily practices still apply. You're giving students at least 10 minutes a day to read their book club book in class, and they're expected to read at least 10 minutes at home or more of their book club book. You're still conferring with your students every day during that reading time, and students are still writing daily journal entries. Now, those journal entries might start to look different depending on how you want to structure your book clubs. Maybe their journal entry focus is just on developing good high-level questions for discussions in preparation for that meeting, and then providing answers to those questions. And so you as the teacher, when you're conferring, can provide really good feedback to make sure that the discussions that are going to occur later in the week are really rich, guided and directed by valuable, interesting, and reflective questions. So how are book clubs structured? This is a recommendation. Every teacher can tailor it differently for the needs of your students. Typically, I had students meet once a week for 20 to 30 minutes. Usually we would have, anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, probably usually 4 is what I prefer. So 4 meetings total before the book needed to be finished. These meetings can be in person and remote, which is great. Back in 2017, 2018, I partnered with a teacher to do book clubs with our students who were not in the same building. We thought we were really, really innovative by using this cool new technology called Google Hangout and having kids webcam each other. Like, woo, we are so 21st century, and now everyone knows how to use that. So Zoom is a great tool if you wanted to maybe merge book clubs beyond just your students in your classroom. So how can we foster student-led discussions to ensure that those conversations are deep and not superficial? Consider having students write different types of questions. Again, use those conferences to help them refine and revise those questions, but they can be character-based questions, thematically based questions, genre-based, structure-based, analyzing those literary devices and what choices authors make and why. But use those thought logs as the basis for a book club discussion. They are expected to have their book and their thought log in front of them during book club meetings, because that is where they're tracking their thinking and their questions, and that's where discussion will spring from. So what makes one book club more effective than the other? We're going to break out and kind of discuss this a little bit, but I have two examples of student-led book clubs. One is a really productive, rich discussion. The other is not a rich discussion at all. So we're going to show the ineffective one first, the effective one next, and then we'll break out and kind of discuss what about those book clubs were effective or not. Okay, so let's watch the ineffective group first.
Keisha is Drew's daughter.
Oh, that's right. I'm thinking of
I don't know.
but there's like, yeah, it's her. So her Aunt Loretta married Drew, or was like dating Drew.
Yeah, dating. Like Keisha is Drew's daughter. Which Aunt Loretta's
Oh, that's right. I'm thinking of
I don't know.
But there's like, yeah, it's her. So her Aunt Loretta married Drew, or was like dating Drew.
Yeah, dating. Like they were
engaged. Oh yeah. But then it was his niece,
his daughter. From
from the previous marriage.
Yeah.
And then she's
a very
entitled, mean person.
Yeah.
I like her.
Like you can take children. So what is your guys' opinion on think there was a person?
I think there was,
since Rachel said she remembers it.
Yeah. So I think there was, but at the same time, like Rick was like going on a little later saying like I don't I lied and like all this stuff.
Yeah.
But then it was just the one that threatened him.
Yeah. I think it's because of the
I feel like
the pigeon man. Pigeon man scared me. Like you say anymore, I'm gonna kill you.
But then I think
that's part of the why he ran away. Like he was scared of that. Yeah. He was also scared of the police.
Yeah, but then he was saying I lied, like I can't talk to the police because I lied about it. Which, like, I don't know. I don't think he did, but I think he was scared enough to where he convinced himself that he didn't see anything.
I think he was describing the boyfriend to the police at the one night before he left. Yeah. I think he was describing the boyfriend to himself in the stairs.
Okay, that was our ineffective example. Let's take a look at maybe more of a productive, rich discussion.
Because like now he finds out after like Hassan's dead that it's actually his half brother.
One question I wrote down, I remember like the dream about the lake and they're swimming in the lake. I kind of picked up on that was symbolic. It wasn't very discreet at all. But that's what I did for my thought log. And so I asked, what are the monsters in Amir's lake? So what's consuming? What's like really dragging him down?
Yeah. I feel
like was it him realizing that Hassan's brother and how he treated him?
I think he was guilty before that because he was still struggling with. He hasn't even told his wife Soraya that like he witnessed one of his closest friends like get raped, and he's not told anybody that he knows. And it's not really consuming him, but it eats away at him slowly because like he still thinks about it.
Yeah, and like in the part after he like read the letter, and like how it was just like that time where he just like went away. He was like, no, I can't do this. Like it just like it was probably in that moment it just like overtook him. He was like overwhelmed. Like I would have been overwhelmed.
Yes, but this starts onto a question that I actually have. Is he actually a good person or?
Okay, our more effective discussion there. Let's go ahead and break out and discuss what made that first group discussion ineffective and that first group more so. They're not perfect, but at least more of a richer conversation. Okay. Both of you guys had similar discussions, but there were some different clear points made that I'd love for you guys to come together and hear each other say. What made that first group ineffective? Let's start there.
I kind of questioned if all of them had read the book.
As their teacher, I did the same. What clues did they give you that maybe they weren't they hadn't potentially.
So I guess it was like the circling back of like constantly needing clarifying. And like the thing is like one thing Jennifer said, which was very true. Some students might be those type of readers. Like maybe they're kind of fluent, but maybe I have difficulties comprehending, or maybe the plot was complicated to them. So I don't want to like totally take away like, oh yeah, none of them read or anything. But there was a lot of clarifying, like mix-ups of characters. Oh, it was his niece. No, it was his daughter. No, it, like those kinds of things were, there was a lot of circling back about like, wait, who was this again? And that's kind of what made me question it.
And if you were to show this example to students in preparation for book clubs, you could have that exact conversation, Caitlin. Like, it's okay if you guys need to at the beginning clarify your understanding so that everyone's having like the same understanding of what's going on in the text. But you have to move beyond that. Yeah, Laura, you were going to say something.
Yeah, just similar. It was very surface level. Lisa brought up a good point, though, that at least they were engaged with the text. They were all on topic. So for some students, that might be where they're at, right now. So yeah.
Definitely. And with that, in terms of, I think teachers always wonder, like, if I just go let kids talk about their book, are they going to stay on topic? And so we have to, it takes practice and modeling of, here's the expectations for behavior. What did you guys agree on in your norms in your contract? But making sure that students have ownership of that process. But yeah, they were definitely like stuck in basic surface level conversation. What about our second group? They weren't perfect, but what made them maybe more effective than that previous group?
Just deeper discussions. They had thoughts they were sharing from their thought logs, and then it seemed like people are adding onto it, or developing even their thoughts with the same question maybe they hadn't thought. It just seemed like a deeper conversation with more details and deeper thought patterns.
Yes, there's a difference between analyzing a symbol in a text and clarifying who the characters are, for sure. Anything else to add there?
I saw that too, and there seemed like a bit of trust between the group. They would piggyback off each other, and if there were different ideas, it was okay. They would kind of talk about them, but there was like an amount of trust with each other to put their ideas out there. So that was kind of nice to see.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mary. And that just doesn't just happen, right? As teachers, if we're practicing conversation as a group and reflecting and using class time to explicitly teach them how to converse, how to ask questions, how to follow up, how to transition appropriately, when should you interrupt and when should you not? Those kinds of things don't just happen organically. It needs to be taught, for sure. Anything else on that second group? The key takeaway with that more effective group is it really came down to the types of questions they were asking each other. The first young man asked about the symbolism and what's eating away at the character, and that really sprung a deep conversation. But it also led, if you heard at the end, another boy off camera, it inspired him to ask one of his questions, is he a good person? And that leads into another rich. So it's like dominoes. We have to have a good, strong foundation of solid questions in order for those discussions to be meaningful and valuable. And that's why continuing to have the thought logs and the conferences will make the difference between a productive, effective discussion and maybe something that's less effective. Okay. Any final closing thoughts about those two examples? All right. As we wrap up today, I want to remind you that we have 2 more sessions, just 2 more. On February 11th, we're going to begin discussing merging the classics with independent reading. We will talk about the place of the whole class novel and where it fits within our creating passionate readers values. And then the final meeting will be about building a community of readers. We're going to be talking about what do book talks look like in this class, teacher modeling, classroom libraries, things of that nature. But as always, the dates are subject to change based on learning mode. So thank you for your flexibility in that. If you're interested in more hands-on professional learning, you would like some individual coaching or with your department or PLC, email me anytime. I'm happy to come out and meet with you in person or Zoom with you. PL points are available for individual and PLC coaching options. So, and speaking of PL points, don't forget to respond to our form, which I'm going to drop in the chat for you before you head out to get those professional learning points. All right, thank you folks. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks, Abby.